Have you ever seen how life can turn around in a way nobody expects? They say the person you look down on today might be the same person you will stand up to greet tomorrow. This story will shock you, because it is not just about love, but about betrayal, pain, and a woman who rose from dust to glory. Imagine a poor village girl who was abandoned and mocked, only for her to return years later in a Rolls-Royce, shocking everyone, including the man who once disgraced her. This is Miriam's story, and it begins in the heart of an African village. Hey, kindly support this channel by subscribing, liking our video, and hitting the bell icon. Let's go! Miriam was a simple girl from a small village where red dust clung to bare feet and the evening air was filled with the smell of roasted maize. She lived with her widowed mother, selling firewood to survive. Life was not easy, but Miriam carried herself with quiet dignity. She was known for her bright smile and hard-working spirit, even though her clothes were old and patched. One hot afternoon, while she was returning from the stream with a clay pot on her head, a shiny car stopped at the village square. Out stepped Tunde, a young man from the city. His shoes shone like glass, and his clothes smelled of money. The villagers gathered quickly, whispering and staring at the stranger, who seemed like someone from another world. Tunde's eyes caught Miriam's as she adjusted the pot on her head. For a moment, the noise of the market seemed to fade. He was drawn to her natural beauty, the kind that did not need makeup or fine clothes. Miriam, shy and curious, greeted him politely, lowering her eyes as tradition demanded. From that day, Tunde found reasons to stay longer in the village. He began asking about Miriam, buying firewood from her mother, and sitting under the mango tree where Miriam often passed. The villagers laughed among themselves, saying, "Can the city boy truly love a poor girl?" But Miriam's heart began to beat faster whenever she saw him, and destiny had already started weaving their story together. The evenings in Miriam's village were calm and soft, with the sound of crickets singing in the tall grass and the moon shining like a silver lantern in the sky. On such nights, Tunde would look for Miriam, waiting under the big mango tree. His city clothes and polished shoes looked strange in the quiet village, but his smile always made Miriam's heart restless. One night, with the moon bright above them, Tunde spoke words that wrapped around Miriam like a warm cloth. He told her about the city, the tall buildings, the lights that never went off, and the cars that moved faster than the wind. He painted pictures of a life where she would never carry firewood again, never walk barefoot to the stream, never be mocked for her old clothes. "Miriam," he said softly, taking her hand, "one day you will be my wife. I will build you a house with white walls and golden gates. You will wear fine clothes, and everyone will respect you." Miriam listened, her eyes shining with hope. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. In her young heart, she believed him completely. The moon was witness, the mango tree was silent, and her heart whispered that love had finally found her. The wedding day came with the sound of drums and the smell of palm wine in the air. Women tied wrappers around their waists, children ran barefoot in excitement, and the elders gathered under the big tree. But it was not like the city weddings that Tunde had spoken about. There were no golden gates, no shiny cars, no flowing gowns. Instead, there was a borrowed canopy, rented chairs, and a few cooking pots where jollof rice steamed with smoke. Miriam wore a simple white dress sewn by the village tailor, the fabric a gift from her mother. She walked shyly, her head covered, her heart beating fast as the women ululated. Tunde, standing proud in his borrowed suit, smiled as though the world belonged to him. To Miriam it was enough. She did not see the patched cloths, or the children eating with oily fingers, or the whispers of villagers who said, "How long can this love last when poverty is their companion?" Her heart was filled with faith. She looked at Tunde and saw only love, not the empty pockets he tried to hide. As the drums played and the dancing began, Miriam believed with all her soul that forever had just begun. After the wedding, Miriam followed Tunde to the city with nothing but hope in her heart and a small bag of clothes tied in a wrapper. The city was louder than anything she had ever known. The honking of cars, the shouting of traders, and the endless movement of people made her eyes wide with wonder. Tunde walked with confidence, promising her that soon, all this would be theirs. But the reality of city life was different. Tunde's small room was at the back of a compound filled with noisy tenants. The walls were cracked, the roof leaked when it rained, and rats scurried across the floor at night. Miriam tried to hide her disappointment, reminding herself of his sweet promises under the moonlight. She swept the compound, fetched water, and cooked meals with the little money Tunde brought home. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The city did not welcome them with open arms. Tunde's jobs were unstable. Sometimes he came home with money, other times he returned with excuses. The neighbors began to whisper, "Is this not the fine city boy who married that village girl? See how they are now struggling." Miriam endured the hunger, the embarrassment, and the shame. Yet, she continued to smile at Tunde, telling him that things would get better. But inside her, she could feel the promises fading, like smoke dissolving into thin air. The life she had dreamed of seemed far away, and the cracks in their love story had only just begun to show. The early months in the city had been hard, but Miriam's love gave her strength. She believed that with patience and prayer, things would change. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise to cook a small pot of pap, and she packed lunch for Tunde before he went out in search of work. But the money he brought home was never enough. Rent piled up, bills grew heavier, and sometimes they went to bed with empty stomachs. At first, Tunde tried to stay calm, but soon the pressure began to eat at him. He looked at Miriam, and instead of seeing a supportive wife, he began to see the weight of his troubles. "Miriam," he snapped one night, "what do you even know about city life? You eat, you wait, but you don't bring money. How do you expect us to survive like this?" Miriam's heart broke at his words. She had given up her simple village life to stand beside him. She tried to remind him of love, of their vows under the mango tree, but Tunde's face grew harder with each passing day. He started comparing her to city women, saying they knew how to dress fine, talk smart, and bring opportunities. Miriam, with her humble ways, seemed too plain for the shining life he wanted. The arguments became frequent. Hunger made their tempers sharp, and poverty became like a third person living in their small room. Miriam still loved him deeply, but she began to see that love alone could not fill an empty pot. Poverty was testing them, and slowly, Tunde's heart was drifting away. As days turned into months, Tunde's frustration grew deeper. He no longer looked at Miriam with the same tender eyes he once had under the mango tree. The struggle of life had hardened his heart. Then came Nkechi, a woman whose presence could not be ignored. Nkechi was everything Miriam was not. She was tall, confident, and dressed in expensive lace that shone in the sun. Her perfumes filled the air before she even entered a room. She owned shops in the city and drove a car that made heads turn. Tunde met her through a friend at a party, and from the moment she smiled at him, his spirit was shaken. Nkechi liked how Tunde carried himself, despite his hidden struggles. She began to invite him out, offering him food, money, and comfort that Miriam could never provide. She told him, "Tunde, you are too fine a man to be wasting away with poverty. A man like you deserves to stand tall, not hide in shame." Her words were like honey dripping into his ears. Slowly, Tunde started staying out late, coming home with new clothes that Miriam knew she hadn't washed. She smelled strange perfumes on him and saw the signs, but each time she asked, Tunde waved her off with anger. "Stop questioning me, Miriam. You don't understand city life." Miriam's heart ached as she watched the man she loved being pulled away by the glitter of wealth. Poverty had tested their love, but now another woman was offering Tunde an escape. And though Miriam tried to hold him, Nkechi's promises of a better life began to tighten their grip on him. Miriam had always believed that a wife should stand by her husband, no matter the storm. So when Tunde invited her to a city party one Saturday evening, her heart leapt with hope. She thought maybe he was beginning to remember their love, maybe he wanted to show her proudly as his wife. She borrowed a wrapper from a kind neighbor and wore her old blouse, washing it carefully until it looked neat. With simple sandals on her feet and her hair tied back, she followed Tunde, her heart filled with quiet joy. The party was held in a grand hall glittering with lights. Music blasted from speakers, and women in shining lace gowns walked past with gold earrings that sparkled like the stars. Men wore expensive agbada, their perfumes filling the air. Miriam felt small as she entered, clutching her wrapper tightly. She smiled shyly at the guests, but their eyes told her she did not belong. When people asked about her, Tunde laughed nervously. "Oh, she's just someone from the village," he said, refusing to call her his wife. The words stabbed Miriam's heart like a knife. Some women whispered loudly, mocking her clothes and calling her a bush girl. Laughter followed her everywhere she turned. Miriam tried to hide her tears, but the pain was too heavy. She sat quietly in a corner while Tunde danced with Nkechi, his arm proudly around her waist. For the first time, Miriam realized that her love meant nothing in the eyes of the city. She had been brought into a world that rejected her, and the man she loved most had chosen to join in her humiliation. After the shameful party, Miriam's life in the city became colder than harmattan mornings. Tunde hardly spoke to her anymore. He came home late at night, often smelling of rich food and expensive perfume, while Miriam waited in the dark with an empty stomach. Sometimes he didn't come home at all. When she tried to ask questions, his replies were sharp, his eyes filled with anger. One morning, Tunde dropped the words like a stone into her lap. "Miriam, this marriage is over. I can't continue like this. You are not the wife I need." His voice was firm, and his face carried no trace of the man who once promised her golden gates and a bright future. Miriam's knees grew weak. "Tunde, please," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I left everything to follow you. I stood with you through hunger. Why now?" But her pleas could not touch him. Tunde had already made his choice. Papers were signed, and Miriam was pushed out of the small room they once shared. She left with nothing. No money, no clothes except what she carried in a small bag, and no husband to call her own. The neighbors shook their heads as she walked away, her steps slow and heavy. "So this is how it ends," they murmured. "The poor village girl has been thrown aside." Miriam returned to her mother's house in the village, carrying with her only sorrow and shame. The same moon that once heard Tunde's promises now witnessed her tears. She was no longer a wife, but a woman broken and discarded, left to face a world that had already judged her. When Miriam stepped back into her village, the red dust of the road clung to her sandals as if it too wanted to remind her of her past. She carried only a small bag and a heavy heart. Children ran ahead, shouting, "Miriam is back! Miriam has come home!" The women looked at her quietly, their eyes filled with pity, while the men shook their heads, whispering about how city life had swallowed her marriage. Her mother embraced her tightly, tears flowing freely. "My daughter, you are alive, and that is enough," she said. But Miriam could see the worry hidden in her mother's tired eyes. Word spread quickly across the village. Some neighbors offered sympathy, but many tongues wagged. "Didn't we say it? A city man will never stay with a poor girl. See her now, divorced and empty-handed." They gossiped at the market. Miriam felt the sting of their words, but inside her chest, a small flame of determination refused to die. She had been disgraced, yes, but she was not dead. Each morning, she rose early to help her mother with the farm, carrying firewood and fetching water as though nothing had changed. When children laughed at her behind their hands, she lifted her chin and walked on. In the quiet of the night, When the crickets sang, Miriam wept softly into her pillow. Yet even in her tears, she prayed for strength. She told herself that her story was not finished. One day, these same villagers who pitied and mocked her would see her rise again. Life in the village slowly settled into routine for Miriam, but her heart still carried the weight of shame. She worked in the farm with her mother by day, and at night, she often sat under the mango tree where the moonlight reminded her of Tunde's empty promises. Her eyes were always wet with tears, though she tried to hide them from others. One evening, as she sat quietly by the roadside, an elderly widow named Mama Abike stopped beside her. Mama Abike was known in the village for her wisdom and her own story of survival. She had lost her husband when she was still young, yet she raised her children alone and managed to build a small but respected life. "Miriam, my daughter," Mama Abike said gently, sitting beside her. "I see sorrow in your eyes every day. You must understand. Your tears can either drown you or water your destiny." Miriam lifted her head, confused. "Mama, what do you mean?" The old woman placed her hand on Miriam's shoulder. "Crying will not change the past. Yes, Tunde disgraced you. Yes, people are laughing. But what matters is what you do with the pain. If you let it drown you, you will remain in darkness. But if you use it as water, it will grow something greater in your life." Those words sank deep into Miriam's heart. For the first time, she felt a spark of courage. She realized that her suffering could become her strength. That night, as she lay on her mat, she whispered to herself, "I will not let my tears drown me. I will use them to rise." The morning after Mama Abike's advice, Miriam rose with a new spirit. She could no longer sit and wait for pity to swallow her. She told her mother, "Mama, I want to start something, no matter how small." With the little savings her mother gave her, Miriam bought flour, sugar, and yeast from the market. She spent the night learning how to bake small loaves of bread with the help of a neighbor who knew the trade. When the first batch came out of the clay oven, the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Miriam's heart lifted. She placed the loaves neatly on a wooden tray and tied a cloth around her head to balance it. With bare feet, she set out on the village road at sunrise, calling softly, "Bread, hot bread, sweet bread." At first, people looked at her with surprise. Some mocked. "See the girl who went to the city and returned with nothing, now hawking bread." But Miriam did not let their words shake her. She smiled, greeted everyone respectfully, and continued walking. Slowly, children gathered with coins in their hands, excited to buy. Women returning from the stream stopped her to purchase loaves for their families. Day by day, Miriam's bread began to gain attention. People said her bread was softer and sweeter than any they had tasted before. She woke up earlier each morning, baked more loaves, and walked longer distances to reach nearby villages. Though her feet ached and her head throbbed from carrying the heavy tray, her heart was strong. With every loaf sold, Miriam felt her dignity returning. She was no longer just the abandoned wife of Tunde. She was Miriam, the bread seller, and her journey had only just begun. One bright morning, Miriam carried her tray of freshly baked bread along the dusty road that led to the main highway. Her voice was calm but firm as she called out, "Bread, hot bread, fresh bread." Sweat rolled down her face, yet her spirit remained unbroken. She had no idea that this day would change her life forever. A black jeep stopped near the roadside. From it stepped a tall man with fair skin and a kind smile. He was a foreigner, an investor visiting the nearby town for business. Curious about the smell of the bread, he waved Miriam closer. "Young woman," he said in accented English, "may I try your bread?" Miriam's hands trembled as she offered him a loaf. The man broke it and tasted. His eyes widened. "This is very good. Soft, delicious," he exclaimed. He asked her name, and Miriam introduced herself shyly, balancing the tray on her head. He was impressed not just with the bread, but with the determination in her eyes. "You make this yourself?" he asked. Miriam nodded. She explained how she baked at night and walked miles each morning to sell. The man smiled warmly. "You are a strong woman. With support, you can do much more than hawk bread on your head." Before leaving, he bought every loaf on her tray and gave her extra money. He handed her his card and said, "One day, come and see me in town. I believe in women like you." As Miriam walked home with an empty tray and a heart full of hope, she realized this was no ordinary encounter. It was the beginning of a door opening, one that poverty and shame had tried to close forever. Weeks after the chance meeting, Miriam gathered courage and traveled to the nearby town with the investor's card in her hand. Her wrapper was simple, her slippers worn, but her heart carried hope. When she arrived at his office, the receptionist looked at her with surprise, but the man welcomed her warmly. He introduced himself as Mr. David, a businessman who believed in empowering hardworking women. Miriam offered him a fresh loaf of bread she had baked that morning. He tasted it again and nodded with satisfaction. "Your bread has quality," he said. "But more than that, you have determination. I will help you, not with plenty money, but with small support and guidance to grow." True to his word, Mr. David gave her a small loan and connected her to a woman in town who owned an unused clay oven. With that, Miriam no longer baked with her neighbor's small fire. She began to bake in larger batches, waking up earlier and hiring 2 young girls to help her knead and shape the dough. The business grew faster than she expected. People from nearby villages came to buy from her, and soon her bread became a name on many lips. With the profits she made, Miriam rented a small shop by the roadside. A wooden signboard was placed above it, "Miriam's Fresh Bread." The day she unlocked the door of her first bakery, Miriam's eyes filled with tears. She remembered the days of carrying firewood on her head, the shame of being divorced, and the whispers of villagers. Now she stood before a new chapter. The bakery was small, but to Miriam, it was a palace of her own making. At first, Miriam's bakery became the talk of the village and surrounding towns. People loved her bread, and every morning customers lined up outside her small shop before the doors even opened. But with success came new challenges she had never faced before. One morning, Miriam arrived early to bake, only to find that her storehouse of flour had been broken into during the night. The sacks were torn open, and half of her supplies had been stolen. Her heart sank, but she refused to give up. She cleaned up the mess, bought new supplies with her savings, and kept baking. Soon after, whispers of jealousy began to grow. Some villagers who had once mocked her now envied her progress. A few women said loudly at the market, "She thinks she is better than us because she sells bread in town." Others went further, trying to spread rumors that her success was tied to charms or hidden help from men. Worse still, a rival baker in town, threatened by her popularity, tried to sabotage her. He bribed a worker to spoil her dough with salt one morning, and customers complained bitterly that the bread tasted bad. Miriam wept that night, but Mama a Bike reminded her, "Every tall tree must face the wind. Don't let their jealousy uproot you." With renewed strength, Miriam tightened security around her bakery and chose her workers carefully. She worked even harder, baking fresh batches that restored her customers' trust. Though the road was rough with theft, jealousy, and sabotage, Miriam stood firm. She realized that success was not only about rising, but also about surviving the storms that came with it. The days of hunger and gossip slowly became shadows of the past as Miriam's bakery began to shine brighter. Her bread was no longer just a village delight. It was now being sold in neighboring towns. Traders carried loaves of her soft golden bread to markets far and wide, and people would say, "Have you tasted Miriam's bread? It is like no other." Soon, her bakery outgrew its first building. With the profits she saved, Miriam built a bigger shop, painted in bright colors, and employed more workers from her village. Those same villagers who once whispered behind her back now greeted her with respect. Some of them even begged for jobs, and Miriam, with a forgiving heart, gave them work. Her name became a symbol of resilience. School children sang her praises as they carried her bread in their lunchboxes. Even elders would sit under mango trees and speak proudly of how the poor divorced woman had turned her tears into testimony. Wealth began to flow into Miriam's life. She bought land, built a fine house for her mother, and ensured her siblings had proper education. She walked through the market with dignity now, her head high, her steps steady. But what touched her most was not the money or the praise. It was the joy of knowing that her pain had not wasted. Her story gave hope to widows, to poor women, and to anyone who had once been mocked. Miriam tasted success not only in the bread she baked but in the respect she now commanded. And quietly, she promised herself never to forget where she came from. While Miriam's name was rising with honor, Tunde was busy in the city chasing another kind of glory. After abandoning Miriam, he had thrown himself into the arms of Nkechi, the wealthy socialite who had promised him a better life. Nkechi was beautiful, confident, and came from a powerful family. With her, Tunde felt he had finally entered the circle of big men. Plans for their wedding filled the city with noise. It was not going to be an ordinary marriage. It was to be a grand show of wealth and class. Expensive invitations were printed on golden paper, and musicians from Lagos were booked to perform. Tailors stitched imported fabrics for the bridal train, and decorators prepared a venue that sparkled with chandeliers and flowers. Tunde himself strutted around the city, boasting to his friends. "This is the wedding of the year," he would say, puffing out his chest. "People will know that Tunde has arrived." His friends cheered, some out of envy, some out of admiration. He had expensive suits made, and cars lined up to carry him and his bride in style. Nkechi, on her part, relished the attention. She wanted every eye to see her shining gown, every tongue to speak her name. Together, they planned to make the wedding a display of power that no one would forget. But beneath all the laughter and noise, Tunde never mentioned Miriam. He thought of her only with scorn, imagining her somewhere in the village, poor and broken. In his heart, he looked forward to the day when the news of his grand wedding would reach her ears. For him, it was not just a wedding, it was revenge. As the wedding drew closer, Tunde's pride swelled like a drum. He wanted the whole world to witness his new life, but deep inside, a wicked thought grew stronger. He wanted Miriam to see him in glory and feel the sting of shame. One evening, while drinking palm wine with his friends, he laughed loudly and said, "Do you know who I will send an invitation to? Miriam. Let her come and see what she lost. She will see the difference between suffering and enjoyment." His friends clapped and roared with laughter, praising his boldness. Without delay, Tunde ordered one of his boys to carry a special invitation card to Miriam's village. It was written in bold letters, decorated with golden patterns, announcing, "The grand wedding of Tunde and Nkechi, a celebration of love, wealth, and power." When the messenger arrived in the village, curiosity filled the air. Neighbors gathered quickly, whispering among themselves as Miriam accepted the card. Some laughed quietly, saying, "So he even wants her to come and cry in public." Others shook their heads, pitying her. Miriam held the card with steady hands. She read it once, twice, and then folded it carefully. Her heart did not break this time. Instead, her eyes burned with quiet fire. She whispered softly, "He wants me to be disgraced, but he has forgotten that God writes better stories than men." The news of the invitation spread through the village, and tongues wagged endlessly. Many expected Miriam to hide away in shame, but inside her heart, a plan was already forming. One that would change the story forever. The moment Miriam received Tunde's golden invitation, the village could not keep quiet. Everywhere she went, market, stream, or church, people whispered and gossiped. Some pitied her, some mocked her, and others warned her not to fall into a trap. At the well, one woman said loudly, "Miriam, don't disgrace yourself. If you go, they will laugh at you. Stay at home and save your dignity." Another added, "That man only wants to show you that you are nothing. Forget him. Face your bakery." Heads nodded in agreement, their voices heavy with concern, but also with curiosity. Even Mama Abike, the widow who once encouraged Miriam, called her aside one evening. "My daughter," she said gently, "sometimes silence is stronger than reply. If you go, they may humiliate you. Are you ready for that pain again?" Miriam listened quietly to all of them. She smiled faintly, but her mind was firm. She had grown stronger since the days when tears ruled her nights. Looking around at her bakery, her workers, and the respect she now commanded, she knew her story had changed. "I will go," Miriam finally said, her voice calm but unshakable. "But I will not go as the poor woman he remembers. I will go as the woman I have become." The villagers gasped at her boldness. Some laughed, certain she would return in shame. Others looked at her with new admiration. Miriam folded the invitation once more and placed it inside her Bible. In her heart, she knew this wedding would not end the way Tunde expected. The morning of the wedding came with bright sunshine and restless whispers. From the village square to the city streets, everyone's eyes turned toward the grand occasion. Car after car glittered along the road, carrying wealthy guests in sparkling lace and flowing gowns. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. As the wedding bells rang, a cloud of dust rose on the village road. Slowly, the dust cleared, and what appeared made mouths fall open. A long, shining Rolls-Royce glided into view, its silver body glowing under the sun. Children ran after it, shouting, "See car! See car!" Women pressed their hands to their mouths, and men stood frozen in shock. The luxury car stopped in front of the church, and the door opened with quiet dignity. Out stepped Miriam, dressed in a fine gown that shone as though woven from grace itself. Her head was wrapped in elegant geli, her step steady, her face calm but radiant. Behind her came the chauffeur, opening the way with respect. Gasps filled the air. "Is that not Miriam? The bread seller? The poor ex-wife?" Villagers rubbed their eyes as if they were dreaming. Some who had mocked her before now bowed their heads in shame. Even those who had doubted her strength whispered, "God has lifted her." Miriam walked past them all, her spirit unshaken. She was no longer the broken girl who had once been thrown out in disgrace. Her Rolls-Royce spoke louder than 1,000 words. It was the answer to every insult, every mockery, and every betrayal. And inside the church, Tunde, waiting at the altar, would soon realize the bitter taste of his own pride. Inside the decorated hall, laughter and music floated in the air. Guests wore their best lace, beads sparkled under the chandeliers, and plates of food filled every table. Tunde stood proudly at the front, smiling as if he owned the world, while Nkechi, his bride, glowed in her expensive gown. All seemed perfect until the heavy doors of the hall opened. A sudden silence swept through the crowd. Heads turned, necks craned, and eyes widened. Miriam stepped in with the quiet dignity of a queen. Her geli stood tall, her gown shimmered like flowing water, and her steps carried no trace of shame. Behind her, the Rolls-Royce chauffeur followed, holding the edge of her gown. The hall gasped as one body. A murmur broke out among the guests. "Is that not Miriam? The ex-wife? The one he disgraced?" People whispered, their jaws hanging open. Some women covered their mouths in shock. Others admired her boldness. Even men, proud and wealthy, could not hide their surprise at the transformation before them. Nkechi, the bride, froze on the spot. Her smile faded, and her eyes narrowed with sudden unease. She had heard stories about Miriam, but she never imagined she would walk in with such glory. Tunde himself felt his chest tighten. For a moment he could not breathe. He expected to see a broken woman crawling in shame, but instead, he saw a radiant figure that made the hall tremble. The very sight of Miriam cracked his pride like dry clay under rain. The drums softened, the singers paused, and for a few seconds, all of Lagos seemed to hold its breath. Miriam had entered, not as the rejected wife, but as a testimony of grace. Tunde stood stiff at the altar, his eyes darting from Miriam to the shocked faces of his guests. His smile had vanished, replaced by a frown that could not hide his confusion. Around him, whispers spread like wildfire. "Ah, is that not Miriam, the bread seller?" one guest murmured. "Bread seller? You must be joking," another replied. "Do you not see the Rolls-Royce outside? No ordinary woman rides in such a car. I heard she owns bakeries now, even in the city," a man added, nodding with respect. The murmurs grew louder, turning into open talk. Some guests began to shift their attention from the glittering bride, Nkechi, to Miriam, whose calm presence outshone the entire hall. Their eyes followed her every move, and their tongues praised her quiet strength. Tunde's chest burned with shame. He had wanted to disgrace Miriam, but now it was his pride that was collapsing before the very people he hoped to impress. Even Nkechi could feel it. Her face hardened as she caught the way people looked at Miriam, admiring, almost reverent. The music started again, but the air had changed. No one cared about Tunde's boasts anymore. All they saw was the woman he had abandoned, now walking in dignity greater than his own. For the first time, Tunde felt small. His wealth, his fine suit, his decorated hall. None of it mattered. In one silent entrance, Miriam had turned his celebration into his humiliation. Nkechi's eyes blazed as she watched Miriam glide through the hall with quiet confidence. Each step Miriam took seemed to steal the attention that was supposed to belong to her, the new bride. Whispers floated all around. Praises for Miriam, questions about her success, and laughter at Tunde's disgrace. The more Nkechi listened, the tighter her chest grew. Finally, she could not hold it in. She turned sharply to Tunde, her voice low but sharp like a knife. "So this is the woman you left in shame? This is the one you called poor and useless? You told me she was nothing." Tunde swallowed hard, trying to calm her, but Nkechi's voice rose above the music. "You lied to me, Tunde. You said your ex-wife was a village woman with no value. Yet look at her. Look at the car she came in. Look at the respect she carries." The guests froze, their eyes darting between the couple. Murmurs grew louder, and some even laughed quietly at the drama unfolding. The elegant hall that once glowed with celebration now burned with tension. Nkechi's rage grew hotter. She pulled her hand away from Tunde's grasp, her face twisted with fury. "You wanted to use me to cover your shame, but it is me you have disgraced today," she shouted, her words echoing against the decorated walls. Tunde stood helpless, his pride bleeding in front of everyone. He had never imagined his grand wedding would turn into such chaos. And as he looked into Nkechi's angry eyes and the mocking stares of his guests, he knew the day he thought would crown him king had instead stripped him bare. The hall was thick with tension. Guests whispered, others laughed behind their hands, and Nkechi's angry voice still lingered in the air. All eyes turned once more to Miriam, waiting to see if she would speak, if she would use the moment to throw back the shame Tunde once poured on her. But Miriam did not raise her voice. She did not boast about her success, nor did she remind Tunde of his betrayal. Instead, she stood tall, her face calm, her eyes shining with quiet strength. She walked slowly toward the front where the couple stood, her steps steady like a queen who feared nothing. When she reached them, the hall grew silent. Miriam looked at Tunde, then at Nkechi. Her lips curved into a gentle smile. "May your marriage bring you wisdom," she said softly, her voice carrying through the hall. "May you both learn that pride destroys, but humility builds. I wish you peace." Gasps echoed as her words settled in the air. Some guests clapped softly, Others nodded in deep respect. Instead of revenge, Miriam had given a blessing. Instead of mockery, she had shown grace. With that, she turned and began her walk back down the aisle. Her gown shimmered under the lights, her head held high. The chauffeur opened the doors for her, and once again, the gleaming Rolls-Royce awaited outside. As Miriam stepped out, the crowd inside murmured in awe. She had entered the hall as a story of strength, and she was leaving as a legend. That day, her walk was not just an exit. It was a walk of triumph. The wedding feast continued, but the joy that once filled the hall had vanished. Though music played and plates of food were served, the laughter was thin and forced. Guests whispered about Miriam, not about Tunde and Nkechi. What was meant to be the couple's day of glory had turned into a stage for shame. Nkechi sat with a stiff face, refusing to smile. Every glance she cast at Tunde was sharp like a blade. "You disgraced me," she hissed under her breath. "You made me look like a fool before everyone." Tunde tried to calm her, but his words fell empty. The respect she once held for him had cracked, and in her heart, anger took its place. As the evening wore on, more guests left early, eager to spread the story of how Miriam had stolen the show. It was not a wedding, one man chuckled on his way out. It was a lesson in humility. When the last song was sung and the lights dimmed, Tunde sat alone in the corner, his head buried in his hands. The woman he thought he would disgrace had instead risen higher than him. The bride he thought would crown his pride was already turning against him. That night, as they returned to their new home, silence filled the car. Nkechi looked out of the window, refusing to hold his hand. For the first time, Tunde felt the heavy weight of a truth he could not escape. His pride had not only destroyed Miriam once, it was now destroying him. And before their marriage even began, the cracks of bitterness and mistrust were already breaking it apart. Miriam's life blossomed far beyond what even she had once imagined. From that day at the wedding, her story spread like wildfire across towns and cities. People spoke of the bread seller who rose from the dust, the woman who had been mocked but now walked in dignity. Instead of letting fame blind her, Miriam used her blessings to lift others. She expanded her bakeries into a chain that reached different states. Every shop carried her name, and every loaf of bread told the story of resilience. With her growing wealth, she bought more land, built houses for widows, and gave jobs to women who had once been left to suffer as she was. But Miriam's greatest joy came when she returned to her village with an even bigger plan. She built a modern school so children would no longer walk miles to learn. She built a small hospital so mothers would not die giving birth. And at the entrance of the village, a signboard was raised, "Miriam Foundation, where pain turns to purpose." The villagers who once gossiped now sang her praises. They called her Mother of Mercy and a living legend. She walked through the streets with humility, greeting everyone with the same simple smile. Her crown was not made of gold, but of grace, the kind of glory that comes only after pain. Miriam had become proof that the stone rejected by men can indeed become the cornerstone. Her life was no longer about survival, but about impact. Hey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. What do you think about Miriam's story? From a poor bread seller to a queen of grace in a Rolls-Royce. Do you believe true glory always comes after pain? Drop your thoughts below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful African stories that will touch your heart. Thank you for watching.